Okay. Uh, what was that? Yeah. So we'll start from the point where we left yesterday. It's like, so look, what I will do, I will have a, because I thought that you might have looked into it so that I can proceed in a faster pace, but no issues. Uh, Obviously, you can uh, plug that video after today's lecture and you can still discuss if there are problems. The first thing, as I have highlighted, so look, basically, value and price are not the same thing. In fact, if you go to the English dictionary, you'll find there is a particular word called cynic. And the definition of a cynic is a person who values something by its price. Now, if you have time, just uh, there are YouTube lectures available in YouTube uh, by Pablo Pasinetti, one of the, you know, he's a Nobel laureate himself. So his lecture is available in YouTube. There is a big discussion called the Cambridge Capital Controversy. So that was what is the value of capital and what is the price of capital. And he was basically countering the claim by Shrafa, the Shrafian thought that uh, uh, the capital, the disequilibrium because of differences in values and prices and so on. Now you can have a look. But generally speaking, you don't have to be uh, that much complicated to understand the core issue. The core issue is if you just think of a simple demand curve, what does it say? It says the maximum willingness to pay for each and every quantity. At equilibrium, you pay a price which is just one point corresponding to the demand curve, right? So all other points which are above depicts what? Those are what we call intramarginal units. So at equilibrium, you pay a price, but all the points on the demand curve, which represents the intramarginal units, tells you what? That this particular individual or this group of individuals, which is whose preference is somehow depicted by this demand curve, that for all the intramarginal units, the maximum willingness to pay was higher than the equilibrium price this person is paying. And that is the source of the consumer surplus, right? Now, as Smith propagated, and as we'll find there are a lot of similarities with which we'll be doing today, that from the from the demand side, we can have a good idea about the value of a good. And from the supply side, we'll have a good idea about the cost of producing that good. And when these two interact in the marketplace, we get the equilibrium price. Fine. And we say that if in a group people are uh, maximizing their individual utility or preferences optimization is being followed, then the group's interest will be served. And that is the concept of Nash equilibrium itself. However, I'll not say that the group's interest will be maximized because there can be certain form of games where both are losers. But in general, particularly in win-win situations, if everyone optimizes his or her own utility, the group's utility is. So you do not require government to decide on the production of any commodity because the market is going to take. And this is nothing but what you have done while uh, studying the concept of Walrasian equilibrium. And the government is also not required to monitor production efficiency. What is production efficiency? You are taking care of the tangency between the ISO cost line and the ISO one. Simple. You're producing where your average cost is minimum. And then the part of the marginal cost curve which cuts and goes up gives you a supply curve, right? Very simple microeconomics you have studied. Now, there is one more point. It's about that competition leads to efficiency. Fine, there is no doubt about it because everyone will try to undercut each other. So until and unless you are efficient, you will not be able to survive in that. Now, uh, there is also one thing that it encourages innovation. Why it encourages innovation? What is innovation? Practically, sorry, technically speaking, there can be two types of innovation. One is a product innovation, one is a process innovation. Now, what is product innovation? A product which was not there, which was hitherto unknown, is being brought into the consumption for it. What is process innovation? You're producing already something, but somehow you have come up with some tweaking in the production process such that the marginal cost of producing that thing comes down. Now, when I'm talking about product innovation, you can also think product innovation in terms that uh, you are producing or you have started producing something new. So, where is the cost angle to that? The idea is it was not previously produced because the cost of manufacturing was, or the marginal cost of producing was infinite. Now you're producing it with a marginal cost which is finite. So, in either case, basically, you are trying to bring down the marginal cost of producing that. But when we're talking about this particular that competition leads to efficiency, we're mostly talking about process innovation, and which is also true. There is no doubt about it. If you're competing with similar firms and you want to, uh, and in a perfect competition, the zero long run profit condition holds, which means zero profit in the long run, then to earn a little more profit, to outcompete each other, you always try to reduce the marginal cost because the P star, suppose initially you start with a particular time period T1. At that time period T1, all the farms had converged into a particular uh, equilibrium condition, which is market price P star equal to MC1. Now, in time period T2, at least one farm can go for a process innovation, bring down its marginal cost. Now, all farms cannot do that parallelly. So that is the only farm which can still gain some supernormal profit in the sense P star is greater than is equal to MC1, which was the marginal cost of production faced by all other farms, minus the marginal cost of this new farm. So he can actually, if it wants, it can become a monopoly by undercutting the price. But remember, once it does, everyone will also do the same thing. I do exactly what you do. And that's the channel through which there is a continuous stream of innovations that will take place in that particular industry. So competition has a lot of healthy sides. Now, if you look into the lecture that I have recorded, you'll find that I have talked about these concepts now. Because to understand efficiency and to understand public good and to understand government's requirement, basically, this one is very, very important, which is we call the second fundamental theorem. And please raise your hand if any one of you remember first and second fundamental theorems of economics. Have you done anyone or have you heard in some other courses? Okay, fine. Now, I will start with certain concepts. And if you have, uh, so just I'm just asking someone who have gone through.
So your lecture you had explained in your last lecture, recorded lecture.
When you are not audible.
Hello, am I audible now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry. Because I got disconnected, then I just kept on talking, and then I could hear that someone of you are telling me that you are not audible, and then I saw that I reconnected, and in that process, I forgot to unmute myself. So, when uh, some of you must have gone through yesterday's lecture, right? That recording, small recording. So,
Yes, sir,
was
you
it
have
clear? Yes, was it clear the concept of Pareto optimality efficiency from that lecture?
yes, sir, for
It
No,
was
no.
clear, maybe a little fast. It was just a little fast.
Yeah, basically for me also, it was the first time I'm going for a pre-recorded lecture because I don't prefer pre-recordings. I always prefer interactive lectures. Uh, so, okay, but a lot of you could not. So that exercise actually, I'll say, is partially successful. Now, as was saying, that the role of government, then everyone is saying, okay, leave it to the market. The market will lead it to competitive environment, and competition will lead to efficiency. Fine, innovation and everything. Fine. Then why I require the government? Apart from what we have already learned, that is externality and public goods. I will come later. At least for externalities, where there is either underproduction or overproduction. So I'm talking about the difference between the market equilibrium and the social optimal equilibrium, social equilibrium, those things. So apart from that, then what is the role? The role of the government is basically intrinsically related to what we call the second fundamental theorem of welfare economics. Now, uh, these are particular concepts which we need to understand. I agree that it is very difficult to not only understand, it's also very difficult to teach welfare theorems before studying general equilibrium. I completely agree to that. But somehow we have to do it. And the best way to do it is a little bit of board work and certain definitions which I will give. And somehow you'll have to accept that for the time being. That what I am saying is basically correct. Now, the idea of Pareto improvement, or rather the idea of Pareto optimality, is the core of welfare economics. Basically, what we see in real life, there are a lot of things which are taxed, and there are a lot of things which are subsidized. Correct? Take, for example, airline tickets are heavily taxed, petrol, fuel, heavily taxed, alcohol, cigarettes, heavily taxed, food grains, quite subsidized, drinking water, health services, educational services, highly subsidized. Why? Because what does the government intend to do? The first thing it wants to do is a very simple, old, like eternally old uh, function: tax the rich, subsidize the poor, so that equity is ensured. A equitable distribution of resources among the citizens of a country. That's one target of a government. Now, what Adam Smith and all other economists used to say was leave it to the market will provide everything. However, Smith completely ignored what we call externalities first, and Smith completely ignored second thing, that efficiency and equity are not contradictory. He basically thought, in fact, this is what we call the right wing economists who always harp on efficiency. That efficiency is everything because we do have limited resources. We have to use those resources as efficiently as possible. And then whatever distribution you do, I do not care. But efficiency is paramount. On the other hand, there is another group of economists, predominantly the leftist sort of economists, who will say, look, equity is sacrosanct. If you have unequal distribution, or if you generate inequality from the system itself, then that society is going to crash. And if the society is no longer existing, there is no meaning for efficiency. But both these views somehow are politically oriented. And that is why we call them right wing or left wing. If you ask a very simple non-political economist, he will, and if he understand the problem correctly, he will always tell you one thing. What is the contradiction between efficiency and equity? There is no problem. Both can be achieved together. It's a very simple thing. And that is nothing but the second fundamental theorem of welfare economics. You keep competitive market structure and you keep government for redistribution. When you keep both of them together, both will do its work. And efficiency and equity both can be achieved at the same time. There is no real life contradiction actually. Yeah, if you ask me, then why do we see inequality? Those are points of debate, and the moment you are done with this course, you will have a lot of answers to those questions. Now, to understand a little bit of welfare economics, the first thing we have to be very clear about is the definition of Pareto optimality. Pareto brought in this optimality concept after Rawls' criteria of distribution. So there are a lot of compensation criteria like Rawls, Samuelson, Pareto, Higgs. There are a number, Kaldor. So there are a number of compensation criteria, but those are not required at the moment. What is required at the moment is to somehow visualize a scenario where you cannot make anyone better off without making someone worse off. So, this is a different concept of optimality that you have studied so far. What are the optimality things you have studied so far? Cost minimization is one type of optimality. Utility maximization is another type of optimality. But you have also studied something like the production possibility frontier. What does it depict? It depicts what, suppose there are two goods to be produced in an economy with certain amount of labor and capital or resources which is available. So by using all the resources efficiently, you can produce different combinations of good one and good two. So as long as you are producing on the production possibility frontier, you are producing efficiently, because today you will understand that the production possibility frontier has not come from the blue skies. It has come from a different graph, which I will show. And then things will be more clear to you. Basically, what is this optimization from production side? You have some ISO cost line, you have some ISO quants. So the tangency between ISO cost and ISO quants give you the optimal production. That is for one good. The same thing is happening for the other good. What is common between these two production processes? The economy wide wage rental ratio. So the slope of ISO cost line is given by what? Negative of W by R, which is true for both good one and good two. Because at equilibrium, it will be the same W star and R star. If labor and capital are mobile across both these sectors, then you'll have the same wage and you'll have the same rate of return to capital. If you have multiple factors of production, like you have land, labor, skilled labor, unskilled labor, whatever, so you'll have a vector of these factor prices. Until and unless a particular production process is using a specific factor, all these input prices are same across the farms in an industry. And if if it is the similar type of labor, same capital is always the same, right? It's a financial capital, particularly it's so applicable in modern day. You can always sell off the capital of one kind, get the financial capital, and reinvest in another type of capital. I'm talking about say machinery, or you can talk of a warehouse and whatever, whatnot. So capital is very, very mobile across sectors. Similar is labor. In every sector, you will require some set of skilled labor, some set of unskilled labor. Land is obviously unique. You cannot have different type of lands. A little bit of uh, barren land where only certain set of industries can happen, but then also there is no limitation of different types of industry. Whether you use a barren land for automobile industry or for software industry does not make any difference. If you have really, really, uh, what I will say, uh, fertile land, it does not make any difference whether you cultivate paddy or you cultivate something else. So these factors of production will have their own prices, right? The rent that you pay for the office space. So suppose you want to become an entrepreneur and you want to have an office space in Mumbai. The person who is renting you out will just tell you the price per month or maybe an annual contract. Will not be bothered about exactly what type of business you are running from there as long as it is legal. So this W by R ratio, when I'm talking only about two factors of production, remember I said will remain in the domain of the simplest structure, which is the 2 cross 2 cross 2 general equilibrium structure, which is two commodities, two factors of production, and two individual consumers. Why two individual consumers? Because they have different preferences. We are now coming out of the box where all individuals have the similar preference structure, or we are not in the domain of representative individuals. Okay, so again, before proceeding, let me give you, let me do a little bit of board work without which it's not possible. So let me stop sharing. Let me use the whiteboard. Okay, is the whiteboard visible to all of you?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So far, in microeconomics, what you have seen? Only one type of indifference curve, because we have talked about an individual consumer or a representative individual. What if there are two types of individuals having two types of preferences? Can we solve for that? Yes, we can. Assume these are straight. Okay, yeah, this is almost a straight. Very good. I'm trying very hard to draw indifference curve. Suppose this is good 2, this is good 1, this is individual A, and this is individual. This is B. Okay. Now, what type of preferences these two individuals have? These are all what we call well behaved preferences. There is no problem in complexity and everything. Now, the only thing is absolutely evident that individual has stronger preference for good 1, individual B has stronger preference for good 2. Right? Both are price takers, which means there exists a particular price which satisfies both of them. So let's assume, okay, now this is a straight line, this is a relative price list, the blue one. So if the economy wide, what is the blue line? P1 by P2. Okay, fine. So if you leave these two people in the market, we will prefer a consumption bundle like this. A will prefer a consumption bundle like this. Done. No problem. What if both of them are given a consumption bundle like this, given by this red dot on the blue line. Why a red dot on the blue line? What is the blue line? It's the relative price line. So if you understand or relate back to utility maximization, this is nothing but the slope of the budget line also for both the individuals. That's why I have tangency with the blue line but for both the indifference curves. So now, if both are given this red bundle of goods, both of them can afford because it lies on their budget line, no problem. But look, both are unhappy. Why? Because this red line or this particular new endowment lies on lower indifference curves for both A and B. So what can they do? They can very simply exchange among themselves. How? They can trade. So individual way, starting from this red dot, let's call it C. He gets an endowment which is given by the bundle of 2 and 1 depicted by the coordinate C. He prefers this point, say A prime. So he will be willing to give up this much of good 2 and get this much of good 1. Similarly, for B, she will be willing to give up this much of good 1 to get this much of good 2 so that she can reach B prime. Correct? This is nothing but the Walrasian exchange equilibrium with a lot of mathematical equations you can do. And obviously for the HS students will definitely do it under me when I teach general equilibrium and welfare economics. But for the time being, I don't need to get into those uh, technicalities because you have not done general equilibrium, so it's not required at this moment. But you can understand that this simple exchange between these two individuals will make both of them better off when they move from C to B prime and C to A prime. So can I depict this situation in a different way? I can. Suppose again I have good 2 here, I have good 1 here, but I'll say this is origin for individual A, whose indifference maps are like this. Right? I can also say something absolutely similar for individual B, two good one, and his set of preferences. And the basic concept is B's preferences are different from A's preferences. So can we get these two preferences apart from this middle picture, middle panel? Can I have these two preferences together? Yes, I can. Very simple. And you have the preferences. This is something what we call is an Edgeworth box. Look, the horizontal width of the box is given by the totally available good one in the economy. And the vertical height of the box is given by the availability of good two in the economy, the total stock of good two. Now, what happens after exchange? How to depict the exchange that I talked about just a few minutes back here in the middle panel in this Edgeworth box. Basically, what we have done is, okay, let me draw the green ones. What we have done is nothing. So I will just look into those infinite points where the indifference curves of A and B are tangent. So what does that mean? That means at this point, let's look in the first, let's change the color to red. All these red dots, what does they signify? MRS, what is MRS? Marginal rate of substitution between good one and good two. So basically, MRS is marginal utility from consuming good one divided by marginal utility of consuming good two. So all these red dots depict what? MRS for A is equated to MRS of B. And when I connect all these points, what I get is known as a Pareto set. So any questions so far? If you have any questions, please go ahead.
So this Pareto set is not a straight line, right?
No, not necessarily. It can be, it might not be. It can be anything.
Sir, I didn't understand why are we considering the origin at OB? Shouldn't we just like superimpose the two indifference curves?
Why?
So like why are we doing like this then?
Because look, Priyansha,
Yes, sir.
this is a point which is Pareto optimal. All the points, all the red points, all the infinite red points are all Pareto optimal. Because if you look in this direction, whose utility is going up? A. This direction, B's. And it's a very simple way of looking into it. Because if you take an Edgeworth box like this, take a point like this. Basically, with a simple point in a two-dimensional space, I am addressing a four quadrant. Why? individual A's consumption of good 1 and good B, that of individual B. So this one point tells you the allocations of good 1. So suppose consumption of good 1, very difficult to take. So this one point, call it E, gives you consumption of good 1 by A, consumption of good 2 by B, consumption of good 2 by A, consumption of good 1 by B. And you also understand the total stock available. You cannot do. Can you do by superimposing like this? We cannot.
Sir, but when we will find the like point of equilibrium or something, then will we consider the quantity from origin A or from origin B?
Whichever. That's the beauty. Take this point. What does it say? You don't have to. Origin is irrelevant. This much is consumed. This much of good 1 is consumed by A. So the rest must be consumed by B because that's the total available. Priyansha, I'm not talking about demand curve, supply curve. I'm talking about utility functions. I'm talking about indifference curves. There is no one good. I have already brought two goods here in one picture and two individuals. It is not simple demand and supply curve of one good where you have a price here and a quantity here. I'm talking about two goods produced in the economy and two different types of individuals with different preferences.
Yes, sir.
Where is the equilibrium? Is that the question? I have not started about equilibrium. I'm just giving you the
No,
concept.
sir, I understood. Like
And,
it is the total is like the total goods available are at OB. So if OA consumes some of good A, then the rest will be consumed by OB and like that.
right, exactly. Not OB, A and B. I have
Right,
just
sir. A and
flipped,
B.
I've rotated this picture, the left panel by 180 degrees and put it up. That's it. Now look, what is common between this point, say 1, and this point 2? I'm talking about two tangency points. One, the first the similarities in both these points, MRS A is equal to MRS B. But what is the difference? Sorry.
A is at a higher utility for B, and one
Exactly.
is at a higher utility for B, and the other one is almost
Absolutely.
equal.
Absolutely. So the moment I move, the moment I move from a point like this to a point like that, I can make A better off, but at the same time, I can make B worse off.
Sir, I have a request. When you move your cursor, now we cannot see the cursor. So,
Oh, why?
so it's,
So suppose
I
I
can't.
start. Can you see this now? Okay, just hold on. Let
We
me
can't
change.
see this cursor. I guess
Uh,
there is no.
Hold on. Let me change the color. Uh, can you see this new blue dot?
No, sir, since you're doing it in Microsoft Whiteboard, it won't show your cursor.
No, no.
It
Can you
won't
see
show
the
the
blue dot?
yes, we can see the points. Yes, we can see
Yeah,
the
yeah.
points, but we
So
cannot see the cursor.
the moment we move from this blue dot to a blue dot like this, what is happening? From
Utility of A is increasing.
1 to 2. You're making A better off, but at the same time, you're making B worse off. So, any point on the Pareto set is Pareto optimal. Why? You cannot make A or B better off without making the other worse off when you move along or you shift from one point to other point. So, what do we get basically from this picture? Suppose let me give some numbers. Suppose this is 1, 2, that is 4, okay? 5, 6. So basically, what I'm doing, I am numbering the indifference curves, or suppose the utility levels corresponding to these indifference curves for B. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Increasing in this direction, right? Similarly, I can write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 here, right? So can I have a picture like this? Utility of B and utility of A. Utility of A is 6 and 1, utility B. So I've just plotted the values of the utilities or the utils. So this is what we call a utilities possibilities curve, which I have drawn from the H1 box above. How? It's very simple.
So it will be decreasing, we can see, but how will we find if it's concave or convex?
No, no. Because I have just given certain random numbers here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? But what you can see, there are infinite indifference curves here for both A and B. So along this Pareto set, what you get? Exactly infinite number of tangencies between the two sets of indifference maps. Now the question that you are asking is whether it is like a straight line or a concave or a convex. Is that the question?
Yes, sir.
Good.
So we know
Nice.
that it will be decreasing, but
Yes, it is negative, but why convex?
yes, sir.
Diminishing marginal utility for both of them. Remember, diminishing
Okay,
marginal
yes, sir.
utility?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
That is applicable for both. The more you consume, your so basically what you are seeing is something like this. So if you want to increase, yeah, if you want to increase the utility of 2 initially, where 2 has little utility, lower utility, sorry, B, not 2, utility of individual B, if you want to increase, where individuals, he's somewhere here, more towards his origin, you need to make A sacrifice little bit more, little smaller. So small sacrifice from A will increase the utility of B by lot. Here, where for B, you have come somewhere here, very high. Even to increase, you have to decrease the utility of A by a lot because the diminishing marginal utilities for both of them. That's the core. Now, let's, so if you have any questions from these, whatever, drawings on the board, because that's the best I can do with the mouse I have. Sorry, we have to assume a lot of things which are straight, which are tangent. I understand. And, so sorry for the trouble, but this is the best I can draw using my mouse. So, with all any questions regarding these uh, figures on board,
What is that UAUB graph called again?
it is called utilities possibilities frontier or utilities possibilities graph.
Okay, sir.
No, no, you have everything in the slides. Don't worry. You have all these graphs in the slides, but they're in different slides. So rather than jumping from one slide to another, it's better to draw it on board so that everything gets clear. Now, let me shift back to the slides. So now you can understand that I need some other point apart from the points on the Pareto set so that I can achieve Pareto improvement, right? Because on the Pareto set, all the points are Pareto optimal. You cannot improve a Pareto optimal point. But there is a problem with this type of approach to Pareto efficiency. So this is somehow, for the time being, the best we have at hand. But still, there is a problem. The problem is the individual approach. That I'm talking about making one individual better off without making any other individual worse off. But this is not also a problem. This can actually become very, very important if we can replace this individual by say that these are two types of people. There are rich people, there are poor people. Then it makes more sense in policy making. Otherwise, the government cannot go for witch hunting and say which individual to tax and which individual to subsidize. That's not possible, right? But the approach that we have so far taken is an individualistic approach. Now, the first and second welfare theorems. The first welfare theorem. Any competitive equilibrium is Pareto efficient. I am not going to prove this now. All these proofs and everything are meant for the other course at a higher level. Now, but what you can understand without making things complicated, you can always see that when we move from what we call, say, a monopoly to a situation like oligopoly, to a situation like monopolistic competition, to a situation like perfect competition, the deadweight loss is decreasing. Yes, yes, someone says,
Can we have a 5 minutes break?
okay, okay. So it's so let's gather back exactly at 10:30